5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We are live. Coming to you live. It's Looming live. Say what's up to the people, Dad.
Good evening. Welcome back to our regular 9 o'clock spot. We had a very brief experimentation with moving to 7. Didn't really work real well. You never know what's going to happen when you make a change. So, there's an old saying, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Well, we're staying the same at 9 o'clock. Right, Sam?
Everybody's saying there's a big echo. That sounds good. All right.
All right.
Audio is good. All right. Where were we?
I was talking about our coming back
Right.
to our regular 9 o'clock slot.
Right.
Which I hope will work well for our audience members. It has in the past. I was saying the more things change, the more they stay the same. And we are now going to stay the same for the foreseeable future. Right, Sam?
Yes.
At our 9 o'clock.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. We wanted today to focus on Trump versus the environment. Trump and his administration recently in the past couple hours, couple days have really taken a sledgehammer to a lot of environmental regulations and laws and norms and all that jazz. So we're going to go in full detail about that. But there's also some current event stuff happening. There's a government shutdown that's looming. There was a big court case that said that the federal employees who were probationary and were fired, it was illegal. What's on your mind current event-wise, Dad?
Yeah. I mean, these are, momentous issues.
You have to speak into the mic, but you don't have to look into the mic. You look into the camera.
These are momentous issues. Obviously, a government shutdown would be disastrous for the already core of dedicated federal workers who are under horrible siege and discrimination from the Trump administration. It would also have reverberations throughout the economy. And then you'd have the big blame game, right, Sam?
Yeah.
Between Republicans and Democrats, right?
Right.
Pointing fingers. You did it. No, you did it. Maybe it was the guy behind the tree who did it, not you, not me. I don't think there will be.
Who's the guy behind the tree?
That's the point. Oh. They'll try to blame it on the guy behind the tree rather than take responsibility. Taking responsibility is not something we often see, is it, with politicians?
No.
So I do not believe there will be a government shutdown. We've been at the brink before. We've been at the 11th hour before. No party can really dictate the results because the balance of power is too close. So I think they will reach, simply because it's in their self-interest, to avert the shutdown, probably just to kick the can down the road, and we'll repeat this same scenario again some months or a year hence. But I'm being optimistic that we're not going to have a government shutdown, but don't bet the farm or the house or even your furniture on that, because it's just based on my gut. I don't have a model.
What's your favorite piece of furniture?
My favorite piece of furniture is always the dining table.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
That's where you eat.
Oh.
That's where you gather.
Oh.
So the other big news is a federal judge has ruled that something we've talked about as being illegal now for weeks. The federal courts have finally caught up with us, right, Sam?
Yes. You and me, or who?
You and me.
Oh.
We've been saying these firings are illegal right from the start. And not just talking off the top of our heads, but, talking about the Appointments Clause of the Constitution, the Administrative Practices Act, which details what you have to go through to effect an executive order. And, with respect to the Constitution and the Appointments Clause, we've noted that Elon Musk, who's gleefully waved this chainsaw around as if he was cutting down, dead branches from a tree rather than cutting down people's lives and livelihoods by getting them fired. He is not a legally appointed federal official. He's not a superior official because a superior official has to be appointed by the president and approved by the Senate. And he's not what's called an inferior official because those officials have to be authorized by an act of Congress. I presume Donald Trump is going to rush these decisions to the U.S. Supreme Court. He's already rushing the adverse court decisions on his outrageous executive order contradicting the 14th Amendment that children born in the U.S. but whose parents are undocumented are somehow not citizens. You know, this not only contradicts the plain meaning of the Constitution, as affirmed by a very conservative Supreme Court in the 1890s. Remember, back in those days, the Supreme Court promulgated separate but equal authorizing segregation. So you're not talking about a renegade liberal court. And all court decisions since then have sustained the view that, with very limited exceptions, such as foreign diplomats, children born in the U.S. are natural-born U.S. citizens, and their parents don't have to show us your papers and prove you're a U.S. citizen or a legally established immigrant. And in fact, the Trump administration is undermining even the status of legally established immigrants. They just had ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, arrest a protester on Palestinian policy who is legally in the United States. He has a legal work permit, a green card. No business did ICE have in intervening in the case of a legal immigrant. If he broke some U.S. law, then, you know, regular U.S. Enforcement agencies should be involved. If it's a state law, then the state police or local police. If it's a federal law, then of course the FBI. That was something.
I'm trying to get focus on your face. It's on the microphone right now.
Oh, I
Sorry.
see.
Keep going.
I don't know what's better, my face or the microphone, you know. Can I continue?
Yes.
And then, of course, there's the issue of the so-called, quote-unquote, ceasefire. Russia, you know, has said, we believe we believe in the ceasefire in principle. We have all kinds of conditions, of course, and they just want to succeed on the battlefield as much as they can in the era of uncertainty, with Trump pausing intelligence, pausing aid, then returning it. You know, those disruptions matter. You know, they have the potential to cost people their lives, to cost people serious wounds. You can't just vacillate without consequences on aid and intelligence. So the situation in Ukraine is still extremely unsettled. I'd now like to return to the main topic here, how Trump is trashing the environment. I want to talk first about what the EPA, under the new head of the EPA, Lee Zeldin, has done. What he has done is promise to override more than a dozen basic, fundamental regulations of the EPA that have served us extremely well in protecting our waterways, our air, our soil, our land. You know, the EPA is not some dream of radical left-wingers. You know what president pushed the EPA into existence, Sam?
Yes, Richard Nixon.
Richard Nixon, way back in 1970, and the EPA since then has had very powerful bipartisan support. And its mission is not to promote industry. Its mission, and I'm quoting, and you know, maybe they've erased this now, but this is the long-standing historic mission of the EPA. Quote, the mission of the EPA is to protect human health and the environment, Sam.
Wow.
Today and every day. Its mission is not to relieve businesses of environmental regulation and exposing Americans to depredations of our, as I said, our air, our soil, our water. And this doesn't even yet address, which I will in a moment, the monumental withdrawal of the Trump administration when it comes to climate change. So they are proposed that they are going to revisit with the intent of repealing, and I'm quoting here from the news report on it, water pollution limits for coal plants, air quality standards for small particles, the mandatory reporting of greenhouse gas emissions by large emitters like oil and gas companies, among many other rules. The EPA is even considering upending its own endangerment and finding, a 2009 legal decision that says greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane present a threat to public health and welfare. This finding is a linchpin of agency regulations under the Clean Air Act. Was some wild-eyed radical Democrat president in 2009, Sam?
George W. Bush.
George W. Bush, until Trump, the most conservative president we've had since since Herbert Hoover was elected in 1928. So we're not talking about something that is partisan. We're not talking about something, that is this mythical Green New Deal, which doesn't exist, kind of a liberal program. We're talking about a program established under President Nixon, strengthened under President George W. Bush, that has had solid bipartisan support and overwhelming support from the American people. And experts in the field have pointed out that if these deregulations go through, the effect is going to be disastrous for the health and safety of every American. David Donninger, the senior strategist for the National Resources Defense Council.
Someone's pointing out that Obama was president in 2009.
Oh, you're right. Sorry about that. That was his very first year.
You're supposed to be the world's
political
historian.
I had a senior moment there.
Holy moly.
Yeah. So you had a Democrat and a Republican supporting it, is the bottom line there. I apologize for the senior moment. So let me quote someone who's not almost 78, David Donninger, an expert on energy and climate, who says all of the climate protection rules, the rules to cut greenhouse gases from cars, trucks, power plants, from the oil and gas industry, they're all grounded in this scientific legal finding. Jason Rylander, the legal director for the Center of Biological Diversity's Climate Law Institute, said, what the EPA is doing is crazy. It is insane. There have been attempts to limit the authority of the EPA, but the scale, scope, and speed with which this administration is attacking economic safeguards is unprecedented. Unprecedented. Let's look at an expert from Cornell University, Talbot Andrews. They're expert in climate science and climate laws. He says, and everyone should take heed of this, rolling back these regulations will reduce the quality of life for everyday Americans, even if they don't believe in climate change. And this is, in a sense, related to, but separate from climate change. The EPA was established long before climate change had become a major issue. So he says, even if they don't believe in climate change, voters will be suffering from worse air quality and more frequent and severe climate disasters. Every American will be affected if these potential rollbacks go into effect. And, supposedly this is going to, save money and help the environment. But there's no scientific study to support that. In fact, to the extent that you increase pollution, you undermine clean water, clean air, clean soil, you pay a huge expense in terms of lost work hours, lost taxes, medical bills, a human cost in suffering, in injury, people suffering from respiratory diseases, cancer resulting from environmental degradation. Lee Zeldin, the EPA administrator, has said, well, instead of relying on regulation, we're going to rely on cooperation. Well, how well, historically, Sam, has cooperation with polluters worked? Have they voluntarily ever stopped polluting?
No.
Never. That's why we have the EPA. That's why there's been bipartisan support. That's why we have these regulations. But let's now turn to a related but kind of separate issue, and that of climate change. Administrator Zeldin has said, we promise to drive, and I'm quote, to drive a dagger through the heart of climate change religion, unquote. Now, what strikes you as really odd about that statement, aside from its opposition to climate change? What word really stands out as just totally inappropriate?
Religion?
Religion. Climate change is science. It is not a religion. According to recent studies, anywhere from 97% to 99% of scientists who publish in peer-reviewed journals, they're called statured scientists, 97 to 99% agree with respect to the fact that our climate is being warmed by human activity, particularly the emission of greenhouse gases, and that this poses a real threat to our survival and our well-being on this planet. 97 to 99%. That's about as good a scientific consensus as you are going to get. It's the opponents who are in effect promoting not science but religion, because somehow climate science and its analysis goes against their beliefs. There is virtually no science, and I repeat that, virtually no science behind climate change skepticism or climate change denial. The handful of scientists, are the wildest exceptions, and according to press reports, most of them have some kind of ties to the fossil fuel industry. But if you don't believe the scientists, I want you to believe another group, business people. In December 2009, and I'm reading from my book, The Case for Impeachment, which I published back in 2017, on the eve of UN climate talks in Copenhagen, a coalition of business leaders openly wrote the following to Barack Obama, and I'm directly quoting, quote, "We support your efforts to ensure meaningful and effective measures to control climate change, an immediate challenge facing the United States and the world today. Don't postpone the Earth. If we fail to act now, it is scientifically irrefutable." I'll repeat that. It is scientifically irrefutable that there will be catastrophic and irreversible consequences for humanity and our planet, unquote. Moreover, this letter goes on to say that efforts to combat climate change are not going to hurt the economy, they're going to help the economy, which is consistent with latest studies showing that you reap multiple dollars in benefits for every dollar you invest in clean, renewable energy. But the businessman statements goes on to say, quote, investing in a clean energy economy will drive state-of-the-art technologies that will spur economic growth, create new energy jobs, and increase our energy security, all the while reducing the harmful emissions that are putting our planet at risk, unquote. Scientifically irrefutable, they say. Catastrophic and reversible consequences if we don't act. Spurring economic growth, creating new jobs. And I know you know who signed this, Sam.
Donald J. Trump and his family.
Donald J. Trump, Ivanka Trump, Donald Trump Jr., Eric Trump, the Trump Organization. So what's changed, in the last 15, 16 years? The science is far more irrefutable than it was 15 years ago. And it's no longer a theory. It is a reality. We are seeing right before our eyes the catastrophic consequences of climate change. And I've got some interesting information from your mom, Karen Strickler, who runs a political action committee dedicated to electing public officials who will deal with the catastrophe of climate change. And she notes, we see it everywhere. Entire neighborhoods have burned to the ground in places like Pacific Palisades and Altadena in California, or Lahaina in Hawaii, leaving people with nothing. This has great meaning for me. It's come right home to me because one of my students is from California, and her parents, her grandparents, and her aunt have all lost their homes as a result of the California wildfires. When you have drought conditions brought on by climate change, when you have these Santa Ana winds, you are in effect creating an ideal situation for these runaway wildfires. And it's not a one-off. It's going to occur again and again. Maybe not every year, but the problem is not eliminated. And that's just one element. We also have the horrific storms like Hurricane Helene that have devastated the southeast of the United States. Horrible floods in places like West Virginia that have not only cost people their homes and their businesses, but cost people their lives. Horrible tornadoes that have ripped through the Midwest. Drought and extreme heat in the Southwest. Rising sea levels, that threaten coastal communities and the ecology of our nature that is close to the sea. And the cost of this vastly outweighs, it's hundreds of billions of dollars a year, vastly outweighs the cost of producing clean, safe, renewable energy. As Donald Trump and his family recognized 15 years ago, it's a positive, a big positive for the economy, not a negative. You don't have to take the word of any liberal for this. Take the word of Donald Trump, his organization, and his family. So what's changed for Donald Trump between 2009 and his emergence as a politician? Even though the science is stronger, the evidence is overwhelming, even more than it was when it was irrefutable. He understood that to succeed in Republican politics, you have to be, at minimal, a climate change skeptic and probably even more so, a climate change denier. And contrary to what he wrote in 2009, Donald Trump and his administration are shutting down efforts to combat catastrophic climate change. As Lee Zeldin said, we're putting a dagger through the heart of climate change religion. Not only reconsidering the fundamental, irrefutable scientific finding that's legally binding on the EPA about the connection between human greenhouse gas emissions and catastrophic climate change, but they're even abolishing any reference to climate science, climate change, renewable energy in the federal government. You know, Donald Trump believes, so he says, in free speech, but clearly he only believes in free speech that agrees with him. And, you know, this is what every authoritarian does. They don't only suppress dissent, they erase it. They eliminate it. You know, when Stalin took over the Soviet Union, one of the first things he did was have everyone with a typewriter register their typewriter with the government. Imagine that. So the government could check on what they're writing and saying. What did Hitler do? One of the first things he did, Sam? Burn the books.
Oh, yeah.
You know? And so, you know, erasing climate change from the government, as Trump has done, doesn't change a thing about the reality of climate change. This is critical. You can erase it from the government. You can say, you know, it's like Lord, what's his name, Voldemort. You know, it's the name that you cannot mention. But that in no way changes what's going on in America and around the world, how people are suffering, even dying, as a result of catastrophic climate change. And, you know, with drill, the elimination of any efforts to mitigate climate change or move to safe and renewable sources of energy, not only are they not doing anything to mitigate its effects, they're going to make it worse. And just like the rollback of the rules, the reversal on climate change, who's going to pay the price, Sam?
Poor people?
Everyone.
Oh, everyone.
Except Donald Trump and his rich buddies. They can move anywhere. They can, you know, hire private police forces, firefighting forces, you know, have earthquake-proof homes. They can do whatever they want. But, you know, middle class, working class, poor Americans, they are the ones who are going to feel the brunt of what's going on here. It's a horrible, terrible tragedy. I can't overstate how important this is. And by the way, you know, Trump isn't fooling people. 80% of Americans, according to most polls, believe that climate change, human-induced climate change, is real and is a threat to humanity, and that includes 54% of Republicans. So if you believe, like almost all of us, you know, that climate change poses an existential challenge, then you need to speak out, speak up, support environmental organizations.
That was really good, Dad.
Thank you.
You want to get to some questions?
Why not? Why don't you give them information about your mom's PAC?
I don't want to...
Vote Climate PAC US, right?
No, I don't think that's it.
We never get that right. I'll look it up.
Okay.
Let's take questions.
Some housekeeping stuff. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. Remember, become a member. Donate until you get your questions in the queue to talk to this guy. Like the stream. We got almost 1,000 people watching, but only 400 likes. Come on, folks. Let's get those likes up. This is from... Are you ready?
I'm always ready.
Vote Climate US PAC. It's voteclimatepac.org.
Thank you.
That's her climate change organization.
If you want to donate, that's where, you know, we, of course, we're way biased, but unlike any other organization, they put out a voter's guide of both, not only just incumbents, but incumbents and challengers on climate change issues for the Senate, the House, the presidency, and even state-level elections. They are unique in that regard.
This is a $10 donation from Vladimir Plantin. They say, could corporate polluters be convicted and they would earn higher profits in switching to selling renewable energies, given that their prices are increasingly lowering compared to fossil fuels?
Yeah.
Do you understand?
Certainly you can be convicted if what you're doing knowingly harms...
Oh, no, sorry. The question is, can corporate polluters be convinced that they would earn higher profits?
Convinced.
Yes. and switching to selling renewables?
They've seemed pretty impervious to doing it. You know, they have made their money on polluting emissions, and they're very reluctant on their own to make the switch. That's why you have to have regulations. You know, cooperate with the polluters. That just doesn't work. And one of the things that Karen Strickler's PAC is doing is advocating for putting a fee on carbon, which would make, fossil fuels yet more expensive relative to clean and renewable sources of energy. But also, the technology is moving forward. You can erase all mention of climate change, make it the name that cannot be stated, but doesn't change the reality of climate change, and it doesn't change what's going on with science and technology, although Trump has warred on our capacity in science and technology as well, which is being cheered by China and Russia because, economic prosperity, national security depends upon advances in science and technology, particularly vis-a-vis our rival nations. You have some housekeeping things to do also.
I already said it.
Oh, you already did?
Yeah.
Oh, good. I must have been looking at my sources here.
Yes. This is from member Falling Star Catcher. What is the likelihood that 47 will put the Insurrection Act of 1807 into effect soon?
Oh, I think it's, I can't predict he's going to do that. Very hard to predict what Trump is going to do, particularly when he contradicts himself every day. But I think that's a real fear. And they've even kind of hinted at doing that. Remember, and they're paving the way for it. Basically, Trump has said any protest that he doesn't agree with is an illegal protest. He's even threatened to withdraw federal aid from colleges and universities if they engage in illegal protests. Of course, protesting is one of the great American traditions. Our quest for freedom was based upon the Boston Massacre, right? A so-called illegal protest in the eyes of the ruling British, or the Boston Tea Party. The great advances in civil rights, which even conservatives acknowledge, Civil Rights Act of 64, the Voting Rights Act of 65, grew out of the massive moral protests led by Martin Luther King and others of the civil rights movement of the 1960s. But Trump regards only protests that agree with him as quote unquote legal. So by, broadly branding protests as illegal, contrary to law, the Constitution, which guarantees the right to petition your government, contrary to all our traditions, he could well be laying the groundwork for invoking the Insurrection Act. And one of the great dangers there is not only what it does to our freedoms, but he could use the invocation of the Insurrection Act to affect whether we have a free and fair election in 2026 and 2028.
Based on your ideas of a shadow cabinet, I'm building a web platform to organize such an effort. I'm researching governance models whereby verified citizens and elected officials could vote for policies. This is from John Furs. Do you think representative democracy remains the best form for our modern world, or would more direct forms such as a liquid democracy better suit our times?
Yeah, the reality is, yes, by far and away, the best option is a representative democracy. That's what America has been for over 200 years, and there's not going to be a radical shift away from that. But what Trump poses, more than any other president, by far, even Trump in his first term, is a real threat to representative democracy. Remember, I think it was in the last, for those of you who are here for our last session on Tuesday, I quoted a spokesperson for the Russian state media who said the future is now going to be controlled by the Troika. Remember who the Troika was, Sam?
Russia, China. Who was the third?
The U.S. That was the whole point.
Oh, right.
That, they were seeing Trump as overturning representative democracy in the U.S., becoming another dictator like Putin or Xi, and the three dictators would divide up the world. You know, at one time, to suggest an American president might be participating in that would be the craziest, wildest fantasy. If I had submitted a novel with that premise 10 years ago, I would have been laughed out of the publisher's office. But now, you know, it's not at all far-fetched.
This is one of our Discord questions from Boeing is cool question mark. Throughout his presidency, Donald Trump has tested the limits of executive power, from refusing to concede the 2020 election to challenging congressional oversight and the judiciary. How have Trump's actions contributed to concerns about the presidency becoming too powerful? And what safeguards exist to prevent executive overreach in the U.S. government?
Absolutely. You know, the threat is real. I called it a five-alarm fire. In 2021, before the second Trump term, I published a book called 13 Cracks, Repairing American Democracy After Trump, in which I warned, you know, even before he got his second term, of the dangers that Trump posed to the future of American democracy. And I also noted it's not just Trump. You know, the entire Republican Party is now the MAGA party. And there are a lot of loopholes in our laws and Constitution that a authoritarian inclined president, whether Trump or anyone else, could exploit. And the book talks about various remedies. So I think the handwriting about the danger Trump poses to our representative democracy, the handwriting was on the wall even before Trump's second election.
Should the Democrats vote against the continuing resolution, since it has cuts to Medicaid, Social Security, and Medicaid, as well as $1 billion in cuts to Washington, D.C.'s city government?
It's horrific. And I don't think the Democrats should support it in this form, but should push for some kind of compromise, as we've had in the past.
Do you think Wall Street will make themselves heard to the Trump administration on his bad economic policies if the stock market gets worse? Do you think it could tone down Trump?
I don't think anything's going to tone down Trump at this point. He's already made billions of dollars off his presidency through Truth Social and other ventures that he is supporting. The guy's even selling cars. Can you imagine a president of the United States essentially saying, will you buy a used car for me? Or I guess in this case, will you buy a new car? You know, Republicans were all over Barack Obama because he was wearing a brown suit, which they said wasn't presidential. Can you imagine if Barack Obama was selling, you know, cars, you know, through the office of the presidency? They would have said the end of Western civilization as we know it. But because Donald Trump is doing it, nobody seems to care. And the sad truth is, too, you know, let's assume all these bad economic policies push us into a recession. Every independent, or virtually every independent economic analysis shows who benefits from a recession.
Rich people.
Rich people. They can buy assets, you know, cheaply. They have greatly expanded economic power vis-a-vis everyone else. They can get cheap labor. They can forestall strikes. You know, in every recession, the rich have gotten richer and everyone else has gotten poorer. By the way,
okay,
we have had in the last 45 years or so, 3 or 4 bad recessions. 1982, 1991-92, 2008, and 2020. What were the party of the, and I'm not going to have a senior moment on this.
Republicans.
Every one of them Republicans, right?
Right.
Every one. Reagan, H.W. Bush, W. Bush, and Trump. So, you know, Republicans have been the ones that, you know, I'm not saying they drove us into recessions, but it has been on Republicans' watch that recessions have occurred.
What do you think about Trump, who just said what he just said about Schumer referring to him as a Palestinian. Do you hear about that?
Yes, and it's outrageous. Here is, there are so many outrageous things, I run out of breath. But they are attacking now 65 of our finest colleges and universities, including my own university, American University, supposedly for anti-Semitism and threatening to withdraw funds. They've already, I believe, withdrawn some $400 million in funds from Columbia University. It is another Trump scam. It is a pretext for his goal of destroying American higher education. He couldn't care less about anti-Semitism. He is by far the most anti-Semitic president we ever had. This is a guy who blames who for, virtually every ill in America.
I wasn't listening.
Who is he blaming? What Jewish guy?
Oh, Soros.
George Soros. In fact, he claims George Soros bought and sold Alvin Bragg, the local DA who indicted and convicted him for 34 felonies. He said, if you don't vote for me and you're Jewish, you're not a good Jew. Thank you, Rabbi Donald Trump, telling us who's a good Jew and who isn't. He has said, if I lose the election, this is before November 2024, it's going to be the fault of the Jewish people. He posted back in 2016 a picture of Hillary Clinton with a Star of David in the picture with dollars raining down on her, reprising one of the worst of economic memes, that Jewish money is controlling America and controlling the world. She even said, well, I don't need your money to Jewish organizations, as if, they are using their money to control America. This is a guy who cares about anti-Semitism. That is a pile of nonsense. It is a pretext for going after our colleges and universities. And by the way, he has just gutted the Office of Civil Rights in the Department of Education, and he has gutted the Civil Rights Division of the United States Department of Justice.
Take a drink there, Dad. Spindrift, folks.
Spindrift, pretty good. Not diet soda.
What do you think of Singapore-style authoritarian governance?
I oppose any kind of authoritarian governance. Particularly, Singapore is a very limited, very homogeneous, essentially one.
I did it.
You did that, okay. Yeah. Essentially one city. It is not a model for success in the United States. We have thrived under representative democracy. Any retreat from that would have the most dire consequences for the American people. And we're already seeing that. Elon Musk waves around this chainsaw, as I said, as if he's cutting down dead branches from a tree. What he was really doing is cutting down people's lives, firing people for no good reason, who have not had any negative reviews or have had positive reviews, who are now struggling to pay their medical bills. Some of them have kids with chronic illnesses and disabilities, struggling to feed their kids or pay their rent or pay their mortgages. They don't care. For them, empathy, compassion is not a virtue, it's a vice.
This is from Azuri Arum. They say, is the civil unrest key likely to turn with all of these continuing protests? If not yet, how much more will it take?
What do I always say about questions like that, Sam?
I don't like hypotheticals.
It's too hypothetical. I can say it hasn't turned yet. Remember, to turn the key, it has to be sustained social unrest of sufficient magnitude to call into question the stability of the country. We haven't seen that kind of unrest yet. What might emerge in the future, we'll keep an eye on.
Does mass deportation fit into one of the 13 keys?
It could. I don't see it yet. If it sparks insurrection, it could, mass protests. And depending on how the legalities shape up, it could constitute major policy change, particularly if it becomes enshrined in law of Congress. Usually executive actions alone don't produce major policy change, or they can be part of it, but not alone.
Question for me.
Oh, good. I can save my voice here.
When will you do another live call-in show? I really enjoy those. I am not sure. I don't have the technical expertise for that. And maybe if someone knows and can help me, they should hit me up, and maybe we can do it then. Do you think Trump trying to make Canada the 51st state so Elon Musk can be POTUS? What? Do you think Trump trying to make Canada the 51st state so Elon Musk can be POTUS? Elon's mom is born in Canada. Oh, Elon is also a natural born Canadian. If Canada doesn't exist, Elon becomes a natural born U.S. citizen.
I was not aware that Elon was a natural born Canadian citizen. I thought he was born in South Africa.
Let me check that.
But I guess if his parents were Canadian, that's possible. I don't know the answer to that. But I will say, I'm baffled by Trump's wanting to make Canada the 51st state. In effect, it wouldn't be just one state. It's too big. It might be 8, 9, 10 states. I love the idea, because you're going to have, if you have 8 or 9, 10 states, that's going to be a whole host of liberal members of Congress and a whole host of liberal senators. It would fundamentally change the political composition of the United States and destroy Trump, Musk's, and Vance's authoritarian dream. So I really don't fathom why he's so anxious to bring Canada into the Union.
Maybe that's why.
Did you find anything out about Musk?
He was born in South Africa. His parents, at least his mom, is Canadian.
Canadian citizen, or yeah.
She was born in Canada.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that would play out. Well, that's one of those gray areas.
Let's see.
But if they were both citizens, then I think he would be considered a natural born.
No, his dad was born in South Africa.
So
I don't know if he's a citizen or not.
Yeah. Any rate, it's irrelevant.
Trump's alleged substance abuse addictions, his mental instability, and psychopathology. I don't know. Then there's a period. Also, Musk reportedly is often high on ketamine. I'm not going there. I avoid those kinds of conspiracy theories. When should LGBT people consider leaving the country for their own safety?
I can't advise people what to do for their safety. I'm not in law enforcement. I'm not an expert in that area. But my heart goes out to LGBTQ plus people who are under needless assault. I posted on this saying, 99%, 99+%, almost 100%, never been a Republican senator, never been harmed by a transgender or a gay or lesbian person. Yet Trump conjures up, and other Republicans like Ron DeSantis or Greg Abbott, governors of Florida, Texas, all these fears that somehow transgender people or gay and lesbian people are somehow a threat to us, even though no one is being harmed by them. They are among the most law-abiding segments of our society. I recall when the campaign against gay and lesbian persons, led by the orange juice salesperson Anita Bryan in the 1970s, got going. There was this wonderful cartoon in the New Yorker, of this very attractive young couple, and they're in bed, and obviously the guy hasn't performed, and the wife says to him, "It's that gay rights stuff, right?" And he says, "Yeah, that's it."
That's funny. Do you agree with Ron Paul's statement that foreign aid is taking money from poor people in a rich country and giving it to rich people in a poor country?
Couldn't agree less. Foreign aid has had solid bipartisan support ever since USAID was set up in 1961. Just recently, guess who lauded our foreign aid program, Sam? You know who did it?
No.
Senator Marco Rubio, who is now Secretary of State, dismantling USAID. It's been well documented. Our aid, our humanitarian and our medical aid, including the anti-HIV and disease programs, and I'm going to get this right this time, set up by a Republican president, W. Bush, saved tens of millions of lives, as well as other initiatives uplifting people and improving their lives. And polls show that Americans believe something like 30% of our budget goes to foreign aid. Do you know how much goes to foreign aid of our budget, Sam?
A lot less.
Like 1%. It's one of the best investments that we can make. And if we're pulling out, and who's going to pull in?
Russia and China.
Exactly. Giving up tremendous leverage that we have all around the world to virtually save absolutely nothing.
What are your thoughts on isolationism?
I've talked about this a lot. Isolationism is a great mistake. It was the greatest mistake that a pretty powerful group of Americans, led by Charles Lindbergh, made after World War II broke out, but before Pearl Harbor, essentially saying, we have no business dealing with what's going on in Europe. We shouldn't, not only we shouldn't get involved in the war, we shouldn't even give aid to Britain and other nations resisting Nazi aggression. It's not our business. We can we don't care if the Nazis win. We can very comfortably live with a Nazi-dominated world because we're protected by the oceans. They didn't have the power to establish their views on isolationism. FDR was president. There was a Democratic majority in the House and the Senate. Had they been able to do so, it would have been a disaster. Would Hitler have stopped after conquering Europe and not care what's going on in the Western Hemisphere?
No.
No. With millions of Jews, particularly in the United States, he would have set his eyes on the U.S. next. And we're getting the same kind of poisonous thinking. Oh, we can be partners with Putin. Doesn't matter if he expands his influence. We can deal with him. The same kind of delusion that would have led us down the path of incredible disaster back in 1941.
Has Trump turned the major policy change key, even though his policies have not been beneficial?
Yeah, the key does not depend upon any judgment about whether the policies are beneficial or not, but only whether they're major change. He's certainly moving in that direction. It's only been less than 2 months, and I want to see what he gets through Congress before making that judgment. I have a long time before I've got to turn any keys, luckily.
Luckily.
And maybe I'll have Sam do it because I'll be too old.
No, you won't. Do you have any predictions on the impact of Trump on upcoming elections in Australia and Canada?
I would think, I am no expert on this, but I would think from what I've seen that what Trump is doing has dampened enthusiasm for far-right policies in places like Canada and Australia, and embolden center and left-center politics.
Student protests have historically championed causes later validated by history. However, there have been instances where student activism may have been misjudged, such as certain radical factions in the 60s and 70s that advocated revolutionary violence, which alienated the public to achieve their goals. Given these diverse movements, how can we discern which student-led protests are on the right side of history and which might be overestimating their cause?
Well, it's always difficult to predict, what the right side of history is going to be. It's much easier to predict what the wrong side of history, obviously tremendously damaging policies that Trump is being put into effect. Look, every movement has its radical fringe. But, I grew up in the 60s, and overwhelmingly, the student protests and other protests were positive and did tremendous good. I already mentioned how the civil rights protests led to two of the most important legislative advances in the history of the country, the Voting Rights Act of 65 and the Civil Rights Act of 64. Massive student protests were also critical in eroding support for the disastrous war in Vietnam. Protests also advanced the cause of women's rights and LGBTQ plus rights. So despite a fringe, for the overwhelming majority, the overwhelming thrust of student protests have been on the right side of history, even in the much maligned 1960s.
This is from Madolia. They say, "Hi, Alan and Sam. Many years long fan. Alan, I've wanted to hear an in-depth discussion from you about the know-nothings of 1850 and their evolution and philosophy, including their various names, effects on the U.S., their history regarding religion, especially how it relates to our current MAGA Republican Party."
Well, we have 2 minutes, and this question requires about an hour.
Oh.
But I'll give the woman, I know it won't do justice, but we'll get to it another time. The Know Nothing Party was a nativist, primarily anti-Catholic. You know, we tend to, worry about anti-Semitism, racism, quite rightly. But throughout much of our history, a lot of the thrust of prejudice and discrimination, believe it or not, was directed against Catholics. So this was a very xenophobic, Protestant-oriented, anti-Catholic, anti-immigrant party that grew up in the wake of the collapse of the Whig Party in 1853. And in the presidential election of 1856, the Know-Nothings, or their official name, the American Party, challenged another newly formed party, the Republican Party, to see which would become the second major party to challenge the Democratic Party. And the Republicans substantially outpolled the Know-Nothings and became the number 2, the second equal party in our two-party system. But this history of xenophobia, religious prejudice, racial prejudice, unfortunately, has been one of the strains of American history. I've talked about, the tension on the one hand between those strains and the belief in a more tolerant, open, diverse kind of society. That has been a constant theme throughout our history, and of course has reemerged again very strongly in the age of Trump.
All right, I think with that, we will wrap it up for the night. I want to give a shout out to some donators: Heather Upton, Maria Karimi, Edmund Doyle, MJC63, Channel 1 Texas, Hero75, Comic Fan, Soccer Guy Junaid Naik, Joe Schmo, KS, Diego Yanes Holtz. All right, Dad, what are your final words to the people?
My final words are, the planet is hurting. The planet is in jeopardy. If you want to put it in religious terms, as, pro-Trumpers or so want to do, we are destroying God's bounty. God gave us this wonderful, extraordinary, amazing, livable planet filled with amazing animals, extraordinary plants that sustain our life, and we're throwing it away for no good reason other than to make a tiny number of unbelievably rich people even richer. It's one of the great tragedies of human history and could end, I hate to say that, I'm not predicting it, but, could end comfortable life on this planet.
Yikes. All right.
Yikes is right. These are the times that try men's souls. And by men's, of course, I mean humanity, men and women.
Right.
I'm just quoting there.
Right. All right. Well, not the best note to end on, but I guess we'll end on that. Thank you.
Well, I don't want to end quite on that note. I've said this so many times. For all the challenges, we've had immense challenges before and gotten through them. The Civil War, the Great Depression, World War II, the COVID-19 pandemic. But to get through these crises and these challenges, it requires the American people, all of us, to stand up and speak out and organize for what is right and just.
Good night.
Good night.